Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by lead performance coach of GameChangers, Joel Becker. Joel's academic background includes a Master's of Coaching in Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation from the University of Alberta, where he focused on skating development in elite ice hockey players. He served as an assistant coach with the Golden Bears hockey team as well as a speed coach for the University of Alberta's track and field team, specializing in 1080 sprint profiling and training adjustments. Really awesome episode with Joel. We geek out big time over stride biomechanics. We talk about run to glide. We talk about landmarks that are important in the hockey stride. We also speak about speed, specifically position, pattern, and power, and the imitation off-ice exercises that he uses with his athletes. It is a really interesting and informative episode. If you like biomechanics, if you like geeking out over stride and stride signature, this is your show. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Joel. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. I'm excited to be here and honored to be a guest on your show.
Awesome. It's going to be a great hour. I want to start right off. Your current appointment, you just got through your master's or in the process of that master's. Talk to the listener what that encompassed, and then you're back in the Okanagan now. What are you doing there? What's your current appointment?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, I'm just putting the finishing touches on my master's of coaching. I've been at the University of Alberta for the last 2 years. It's been a great 2 years. My project has been with the varsity hockey team, where I've been serving as an assistant coach, but I've also been implementing a speed development program where we really focus on skating biomechanics and really optimizing the skating efficiency and effectiveness of the athletes within the group. So as I said, just putting a bow on that. Actually, 2 days from now, I'm doing my final presentation to the faculty. So
congrats.
This is a good prep run. I appreciate that. And after that, it's just the capping paper, which is kind of a mini thesis, I guess you would say. And then moving on to, jump straight into training. We got athletes moving in a couple of weeks to do off-season training. So out of the frying pan into the fire, I guess you would say.
Outstanding. Let's go right into biomechanics. You and I talked off the air on this. We geeked out. We're passionate about both. I remember back now, rewind 6-7 years ago, I was doing my PhD at Western, and one of the subjects that I really delved into deeply at the time was biomechanics. And I remember obviously the papers from McGill, the Pearsall, the Turcottes, even the University of Windsor, Marino, and collecting those papers. But one thing always stood out to me. The rich articles that I learned from many years ago from the speed skating literature. And I remember talking to my professor about it, and I said, geez, that's old. He said, don't ever confuse old with good. He said, many of those articles are still relevant today. And I know you're passionate about that. My question is, what can we learn from the speed skating world?
There is just a plethora of information and application from the speed skating world.
Yep.
My background, I was lucky enough, or unlucky, it depends how you look at this. But after my third year of college hockey with the McEwen Griffins in Edmonton, I was recruited by On the Podium to speed skate with Speed Skating Canada. So that was basically, I went from driving go-karts to jumping in an F1 car. So all of the fundamentals were there. It was just everything was now at an absolute, it was a high octane type level. Very quickly you learn, positionally, how strong and how stable and how much positional strength you need to actually maintain a solid foundation for skating. It's as funny as it is, everyone said it's just go fast and turn left within the speed skating world. But I've maintained contact with some of the coaches, and one of my good friends is Ryan Shimabukura. He's the sprint coach for the U.S. national team. And I've had a lot of good conversations with Ryan. When you're moving at the velocities you're moving at, your stability and agility, and it's basically all of those capacities and capabilities you have within a blade have to operate at their absolute maximum capacity and maximum efficiency. So it was a humbling experience for me to walk into the sport as a good hockey skater, so to speak, and then end up within 6 months, I was skating behind Jeremy Witherspoon, who was the technically most gifted skater in the world. So again, extremely humbling watching him and skating behind him. His ability to apply force down into the ice was just like nothing I've ever seen. Every stride he took was like a bomb going off. And just how much he could project his center of mass with each push was absolutely incredible. So to kind of circle back, how much can we learn from the speed skating world? I think when it comes to maximum outputs, acceleration, maximum velocity, the hockey world can stand to learn a lot from the biomechanics applied with speed skating. It's actually pretty incredible.
I agree. There was several papers, and I have them all in my EndNote file, and talking about, the goal in skating is overcome air friction and ice friction and maximize kinetic energy. And that ice friction looks like my hairline, so getting lower in the hockey stride. It talked about shank angles. It talked about trunk segmental angles and how important those were. And I just remember as I went through that period in my PhD and looking at the research, the application and how much my eyes were opened up. I don't want to call it picking the pepper out of the fly shit. I think it's important. And I think it's important that we as coaches understand those biomechanics as well. I think it helps us for a lot of different reasons. Overuse, areas that we can focus on in the summer, patterns that we can reinforce, etc.
It couldn't have been said better, Anthony. Because it comes down to simple things done savagely well. It's an old principle within the strength and conditioning world. So if you can be exceptionally strong and exceptionally powerful in those positions, as you said, but center of mass driving over the ball of your foot to get your shank angle, knee depth, hip depth, trunk segmental angle. Once you can establish those positions and stabilize and be strong in those positions, it opens up a world of possibilities within your gameplay as well. Because now you have mastered those fundamentals of which everything builds upon.
Hockey stride. Briefly explain in your words, run to glide. There are 1 to 2 key factors for maybe, and maybe we geek out and we go high level, or maybe we talk about from a beginner standpoint. Are there areas that you highlight are important? How would you explain that to the listener?
Sure. And this kind of ties in some of the track and field analogies. So
Okay.
You've got the acceleration phase where you go from a standstill to overcoming that inertia and getting your center of mass moving in the forward direction. And that's really just a matter of projection. So learning how to project your center of mass down the ice and to try and create, in track, they talk about the 45-degree angle, but you want to create a fairly good attack angle as you're projecting through the ice. Within a lot of players, and actually saw it a lot at the Oval too, there's a tendency to stand more vertical, where now when you apply force down into the ice, you just get this up and down where you're not actually creating that horizontal force to create the momentum to accelerate fast. And the other part of acceleration that I think is very important is the strike. So when you strike the ice, it's a lot more of a strike than a push.
Yes.
During the initial stages of an acceleration.
Yep.
It's almost thinking of hitting the ice with a sledgehammer to really throw your center of mass down the ice.
That's a cue we'll use for our guys. Hammer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because they need to. It's very violent. I mean, that's where the sprinting and skating overlap.
Sure.
Huge. It's just more external rotation within the skating world, but the ability to project and attack down into the ice, like you said, very violently and very quickly, is what makes those first 3 steps, as people want to say, that makes those first 3 steps, longer and faster,
sure,
so to speak.
Well, not to interject, let me ask you this too as well. You said longer. I'm looking at the research and I'm blanking now. I want to say Shell and Budarik also talked about step width, that the length of one skate, the oblique length relative to the other, and how that could separate really, lower end skaters to elite skaters. And I'd imagine that has to do with a hammer and the angle of propulsion as well. Would that be correct in assuming?
Yes. The caution with step width is people can get too
Too wide,
extended.
like railroad.
Railroading. I was
Yep.
going to say, yeah, the
Yep.
term we use is railroading.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, yeah, the ability, as long as we're projecting at those angles,
Yep.
that's a great thing. So we're
Yep.
projecting from leg to leg. We're still landing center of mass over base of support, so we can attack down and quick. I could speak about it a little bit later, I'm sure, but we're really just trying to keep ourselves in a position where we're powerful and we're not in a position where we're compromising hip and groin integrity,
Yes.
because that's an epidemic within the skating, within the hockey world. It's
Yep.
funny, we didn't see much in speed skating, but in hockey, you're seeing, kids as young as 17 having double hip surgeries right now. So, which is somewhat terrifying.
Yeah. So we talked about the run. Once we get into that glide phase,
Yeah.
Talk to us one or two important points on that as well.
Sure. Comes down to timing and direction of force, really, and being able to transition through the run so that high frequency, you'll see the frequency slow down to a certain extent, but then the frequency will actually maintain a very similar state as the velocity increases. So it'll increase as you accelerate, it'll come down as you start transitioning into your full striding phase, and then you'll maintain. So that's where the direction and timing comes into play. If you can land directly over top of that skate and apply force early and in the right direction, that's how you can maintain force production into the ice to maintain that acceleration curve and hit those peak velocities.
Excellent. Let me ask you this as well, because I know that you're right in the weeds with this, looking at your master's work. Again, this is old research, but we talk about run to glide, talk about that foot strike. We call it bimodal. That's when the foot strikes the ice, and then there's quote unquote toe off if they're, and then we talk about that glide area where it's more unimodal. And looking at some of the research that I looked at my PhD, I believe there was a paper from Pearsall. They had position transducers on the skate boot, and you're able to look at ground contact time or ice contact time. And you look at run to glide, very opposite of sprinting. As speed increases, ground contact time decreases. As speed increases on the ice contact increases. Correct?
Yep. Increases.
Making sure.
Absolutely. So, and that's the ability to apply force over a longer length of time. So, and that by definition is what I call stride length. So how long can I maintain maximum force into the ice as I propel myself forward? It's not how far I can extend my leg as so much as how long can I maintain maximum force down into the ice. Another great paper that I relied on pretty heavily for my capping project talks about, it's just the conservation of angular momentum. So understanding, and that's where this push direction, you actually start pushing towards, for lack of a better analogy, you push towards 10 and 2 as you're at full speed. So it's, and a lot of people have a tough time kind of conceptualizing how you're pushing forward as you're moving forward. But as your center of mass picks up more momentum, you're starting to cover more ground as your velocity increases. That push direction does have to shift forward so you can maintain that pressure on top of the blade through the ice to continue building velocity.
I used to think too, this is totally off topic. I told you we'd get away from this. I told you we're going to be geeking out. I used to think too that because of that larger impulse and time to produce force, that my brain used to think back in the day, well, then we need to have longer impulse jump training. We need to, and I do feel that way still. But having said that, when I look at the run portion, man, you got to snap. You got to have stiffness. You've got to have the ability to stiffen the spring. So I feel like there's a beauty from a jump training perspective when you build a program for a hockey player. I don't think it's one or the other anymore. I think you've got to diversify that jump portfolio for the stiffness and then the longer impulse jumps.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the beautiful thing about skating is it's so demanding on so many different levels from a technical standpoint. You need the stiffness and the elasticity, as you said, for those initial acceleration phases that you get from a traditional, sprinting, more of a running based program. The big thing becomes the eccentric isometric portion of the stride. The ability to basically land and catch and store all that energy and start, that's more the impulse doesn't change so much when you actually say go. You're still, when you tell that foot to go, it's got to go quickly. It's just you spend so much longer stiffening that spring, so to speak, and loading that, I guess pulling back that trigger. And then once you get in the right position and you're ready to go, that's when you release the trigger and take off under the next stride. So, I think that's the direction in the future of stride. And as you said, once we get into more of the technology, Plantega is doing some interesting things where you can look at the force, force going down through the boot. I think they've introduced it into the hockey world now. But once we can understand, where those forces, again, this is that timing and direction. A lot of it is just stabilizing and getting ready and preparing. But when the force and that impulse is produced, it's still produced in a very fast and violent fashion.
Sure.
Because when you kind of look at the, from a neurological perspective and you look at action potentials, I mean, I don't want to geek out too hard. It's an all or none phenomenon. So when a nerve cell says go, it goes, and you get the propagation and the cascading effects that follow suit. So to try and delay and increase that impulse, I don't know if it's all that relative. I think being able to eccentrically and isometrically maintain the force through the ice until you're in a position to optimize that firing pattern becomes the key when you're moving at high velocities.
Like it. There are a million ways to swing a hammer, but from a casual observer, one would know you're swinging a hammer, right? Everyone swings it different. There's not one swing the same. Having said that, from a bandwidth standpoint on a stride, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what landmarks when you're watching a player, or if you've got video and you say someone's out of that bandwidth, what are you looking for? And are there certain segments that your eyes are attracted to?
Yes, absolutely. And I guess to work backwards, there's 3 positions that I don't want to see the athlete in very often, because they're the 3 highest strain positions on the hip and groin. First one is a 60-degree flexion with internal rotation of the femur. So you hear that as stepping out. So when a player takes a stride, if they're too hyperextended to catch themselves, they usually have to cast the other leg forward. So now they're landing center of mass between their bases of support, and they get into a bilateral support phase.
So if you're talking, just making sure I paint the picture for the listener, are you talking in sprinting almost of that, like you're casting, your center of mass is too far in front and that back leg is putting pressure on strike? If you're comparing it to sprinting, how would you paint that picture for someone?
So as a sprinter, that would be your front leg.
Okay.
So after my push off, if I spend too much time on that push leg, that back leg, rear leg, I'll almost fall forward and I'll have to cast out my front leg, my new stance leg.
So almost overstepping then. Overstepping. Okay, great. I just want to make sure I understood. Okay. Yep.
So again, that's putting a lot of pressure through the adductor complex, as well as there's that shear strain within the hip and onto the labrum. And we can get into FIAs and whatnot if you want at some point, but that's one of the highest. So if I see excessive stepping out is what I call it. So where they're landing with their center of mass between the base of support, that front leg is quite far out in front of their center of mass. That's usually a red flag for me. Second position is a combination of external rotation and extension, and excessive extension. So they call it like hyperextension. This one I get a lot of from more of the traditional skating coaches. I get a lot of pushback on it. The toe flick actually really accentuates this position.
Yep.
So
talk to us about the toe flick, because I'm curious. I want to interject. This is where you're going to teach me, but here I want to give you some speed skating. Now, I know the totally different blades. One of the research papers that I looked at talked about this. I don't quote me on this. The knee extension, limited knee extension phenomena, meaning like knee extension occurs in the air, not on the ice. At least in this particular research article.
Yep.
So that quote unquote toe flick, that shallow amplitude quad that is really happening in the air, not on the ice. If it was happening on the ice, you'd drag your foot.
Yeah, 100, absolutely.
So I just interesting to hear how people speak about the hockey stride, and well, it's triple extension. Well, that you're extending, but that last bit of extension, the skate is actually lifted off the ice. I know I'm picking pepper out of fly crap, but that's what we're talking about, correct?
That's 100% we're talking about.
Great.
So that's, I mean, it's the equivalent. Sprinting went through the same analogies when they were talking about really get that full triple extension push off the toe. Hamstring injuries started happening left, right, and center. So very much the same biomechanical principles are at play if we spend too long in that extension and we're really flicking the toe. So again, we've created a ton of shear strain through the hip and groin complex.
Those muscles on that extension are all an eccentric. They're lengthened at high rates of speed. So that is the definition, if we look at it regardless of sport, of a muscle pull, right? High eccentric loads under quick, fast conditions.
Very high velocities.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah. And that's that would probably be the most detrimental. So again, kind of going back to that loading up and making sure the timing of that push, when we push, we got to push early and we got to push hard to make sure that we're not hyperextending that leg and getting into that compromised position. And then the third one is just abduction. So abduction further than 40 degrees.
Got it.
While in a loaded position. So again, I think some of these positions were picked. It's much like running. When you take a snapshot of a skater as he moves onto the new stance leg, it's kind of, as you said, the previous leg is off the ice. It's in a very extended, they projected their center of mass far enough to the other side where that leg is quite extended and it's quite abducted. But there's no load on that leg at that point. It's actually already entering its recovery phase where it's going to come back in line with the other with the new stance leg to reload the next leg. So when I look at the positions that players get into, it's usually based out of, if I see those three positions, I know there's a multitude of things going wrong. And most of it is coming down to they're pushing too late, they're pushing too far back. And you'll see a lot of backside cycling. It's actually kind of the neat sprinting to skating analogies.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of the back of their foot, and they're where they're not really effectively transferring force into the ice. A lot of it's just kind of spitting out and spinning out the back.
Yep.
It's spinning your wheels, I guess.
This episode has been brought to you by the High Performance Hockey Masterclass. The High Performance Hockey Masterclass is a comprehensive lecture series exploring the science and practice of high performers in the sport of ice hockey. It was designed and created and engineered by myself, Anthony Donskoff. It is an 8-part lecture series that includes metric fixation, the tyranny of metrics, reading research, what matters, going back to get my PhD as a 40-year-old, how do you target your readings in terms of digesting, accumulating, and reading your research, biomechanical considerations for ice hockey, the adductor magnus, how we program hip health during the off-season and in-season, the Gain, Go, Grow model, this idea of a 3-day rollover program for high-performance hockey players, considerations for the in-season, how to manipulate that model for high performers, our communication structure within the confines of Donskoff strength and conditioning, and finally, the fast and frugal tree, considerations for return to play. More information on the High Performance Hockey Masterclass can be found at anthonydonskov.gumroad, GUMROAD.com. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, it does remind me of some Altus, analogies where they call it pushers and pullers. I think
pushers and pullers.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was interesting too, and I like looking at this, and I definitely have stole this analogy from, my memory's like my hairline now, Joel. Gosh. Who's the sprint guy, the sprint coach that was under Charlie Francis? On social media.
Under Charlie.
I was worked under Charlie Francis. Derek Hansen. Thank you.
I was going to say Derek Hansen. Yeah,
Derek, forgive me, Derek, if you're listening. But one of the things he talked about a lot in these shapes, or he calls them hashtags, right? Or hash marks. And you draw that hash and for me, one of the things that we were referencing earlier in a lot of the speed skating research is position, position. We're going to get to that because I want to talk to you because I know you like that stuff off the ice, the positions off the ice.
Yeah.
And one of those patterns and positions he talks about in sprinting is the idea of the shank and the the torso, right?
So yeah,
the trunk segmental angle. And he always liked that idea that they should be parallel and the hips and shoulders come along. I like looking at video both front to back to the side as well and drawing my hashtags. And I like to see, number one, are those lines parallel? Are they overstepping? And if they are, you don't see those lines, right? I want to see, are they breaking at the hips? Are they railroading? So if I don't see that long line, if I've got a break in it, are they railroading? And then the other one, and you talked about this, it's just a different way of saying it. So I want to see, is the recovery leg below the hip onto the next push-off? So I think we're saying the same thing. Perhaps we're drawing a different picture. It's just a way for me and my brain to kind of process that if someone were to send a video to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you made a really good comment. The intrinsic, hockey and skating is, it's a very 3D model.
Yep.
I know with sprinting, they say, look from all angles, but in hockey, it's extremely important because what you see from a sagittal plane might be very different than what you watch from the frontal. And as you said, with the weight transfer and some of the lateral movements, it becomes very important to have that perspective and to move around the ice to watch athletes from all these different angles.
The other thing I'd ask, based on your opinion, and this is one of the things, I had the opportunity to work with a youngster like this. Actually, I'm still working with him. Great, great kid. But how anthropometrics plays a key or a role in this. You'll hear coaches say, well, get lower, get lower. And here's the body build. I call it the lightning bolt. Okay. If you've got a lightning bolt that has a short torso, super long femur, and a short shank, I don't care how low you tell someone to get, that's really difficult to do. That's really difficult to do. Conversely, if you have a lightning bolt with the opposite, a long torso, short femur, and a longer shank, you can almost go ass to grass in your hockey position or your hockey position without much, right? The two questions for you. Do you see the same thing? And in that first situation, the youngster that has massively long femurs, we've talked to this youngster about equipment modifications, even skipping an eyelid or even the lie of his stick. You can't turn an alley cat into a cheetah. You can help him or her get in that lower position. One would argue off the ice, but their anthropometrics make it difficult to do that with certain builds. Do you agree, disagree?
100%. And it's the difference between, we see it in track and field. You've got, again, you mentioned the pushers and pullers. You can't expect a guy like Justin Gatlin to move like Usain Bolt. Like, they're completely different builds. They're completely different strategies. It's like you can't expect, Crosby doesn't move like McDavid. Same sort of thing. Very different strategies, very different builds. I think the biggest thing is when we work with these athletes, it's just having them understand where to have their, where their body weight should be over their skate, like over their foot, so where their center of mass is, know where they're driving down through that boot and through that edge, and then trying to maximize the amount of force they can put down in that position.
Excellent.
Because as you said, that the lightning bolt, if you try and get everybody into that same, depth, there's some people that their bodies just won't facilitate those positions, nor will they be able to generate any sort of force out of this position.
Selfishly, because I want to learn, I want to better myself on the ice. What are some cues, external cues you use to solicit that position that we're just talking about?
The biggest one, and I have a great picture in my presentation, it's really understanding, so getting that center of mass directly over like the first med head of your big toe. So driving it down through that position which you'll notice if you have limited ankle dorsiflexion because of eyelids. And I will say in today's modern skate, that's a reality for most kids. If you lace to the top, you're going to have very limited dorsiflexion. So
Yeah.
most of my guys, they take an eyelid out on top.
Yeah.
So it's just the ability. That's the biggest thing. If I can get comfortable and balanced and strong on that position, which is basically on the inside edge of my skate with my weight forward in an attack angle, you're going to be in a good position to put force down through the ice.
Excellent.
And
slight pivot, another passion point of yours, speed, improving speed. On a napkin, what are the elements of speed? If I said, Joel, you got to write it on a napkin, you got to simplify it for me.
actually comes down to, and I know you've heard this, and I hope a lot of the listeners have heard it, force application. It's, magnitude, timing, and direction of force. If you can maximize those three things and optimize those three things, you're going to generate speed. And whether it be acceleration, whether it be change of direction, or whether it be when you're skating at maximum velocity, when all those three factors align, you're going to create speed.
Excellent. What is game speed as opposed to linear speed? And how, in your opinion, can it be taught? If so, how?
That is the $1 million question.
I would agree.
You can see some absolute drag racers that they disappear in a game because they just don't have the ability to apply it in a game. And you notice with the elite guys, it's understanding how to, like Vicky Bendis talks about adding gears with the speed. And she also says, understanding how to apply those. It's knowing when to shift through those gears. So understanding how to manipulate, like as a forward, how do I manipulate that defenseman to create some time and space? Like I might need to downshift and, really pull things back and slow down to create that opportunity for me to build into that speed. It's like, a lot of people use the tool in the carpenter. You may have that tool, but it takes that master carpenter to understand how to apply it within a game. Can you teach it? Yes, you can. A lot of the times it's just, I find more, and especially with my elite guys, it's having them understand how they can pull back and create some space that they can then accelerate and use that velocity into.
Yeah. I think for me, where I've gotten with it, no doubt in my mind, I think it's super, super important. We train it all the time. I wouldn't think it would, but the more and more I've gotten from that, I use a different analogy, very similar, but the race car analogy. You got the fancy Ferrari. It's got the big engine, can go 0 to 100 and whatever, but then there's the driver, right?
Yeah.
And you got to be able to steer and know when to slow down, know when to speed up. And that is something from my experience, that's really, really difficult to teach. And maybe the best teacher of that is video, watching games, watching situations, where to be on the ice. This idea of hockey IQ, which, as you and I both know, we can agree on this. The things closest to the scoreboard are the hardest to measure and maybe impossible to measure. But, it's just, there's so many. An interesting book I read changed the way I thought. And I wrote an article on it, is The End of Average. And it talks about this idea of, jaggedness. And basically when we confuse something that's multidimensional with almost a one-dimensional eye. And that multidimensionalness is the jaggedness concept. So what is speed? Well, gosh, it's just speed of processing, speed of hands, timing and spacing, feet. There's just so many components. Having said that, it's a really windy way of saying, I'm still going to train speed. It's not like we're not, but the game speed element for me is so challenging. I think at the higher levels too, where all those little small things matter, that video and that element of that hockey IQ are even more important,
Yes.
So it is interesting. And it's a long-winded way of saying, I don't have an answer. And I don't think we can measure those really, 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 really hard attributes during the game.
And the best example, living in Edmonton, I got to watch Connor play a few times. Like that is where, yes, he's incredibly fast. Absolutely. But his ability to identify how the play is developing, and you'll see him take a path that you go, it's an interesting route. But again, it allows him to use that speed to his advantage. Like there's other guys, there's lots of guys that actually have the same kilometers per hour as Connor. So it's just his ability to ebb and flow and push and pull and manipulate the defense to create those opportunities where all of a sudden now his rate of pace is twice that of everyone on the ice. And at that point, he's untouchable. It's pretty cool to see.
Touched by the hand of God. I don't know if I've seen a player in my lifetime with the ability to do exactly what you just said. And when he picks the puck up, he's just as fast without it. I mean, he's nuts. It's just, anyways, processing speed. What Tarasov said, speed of hand, speed of foot, speed of mind. The most important is speed of mind. Connor's got all three.
Yep, he really does. Yeah.
Looking at information on your masters, you had sent me some slides. Integrated training model, and I don't have the slide in front of me. If I butcher this, stop me and tell me. But you talked about off ice, meaning like the weight room. You talked about off ice imitations or patterning, and then on ice work, right?
Yeah.
I'm more interested in the off ice patterning and on ice work. But can you give me a brief, maybe a one or two sentence on each? And I don't want to put words in your mouth. If it's a young athlete, the low-hanging fruit is getting strong and getting relative strength in a good full range of motion, being able to hit those patterns. I don't want to put words in your mouth, right? And then as you get older in age, your training becomes a little bit more specific, pattern specific. And I want to see how that looks and if we're on the same page or not. We don't have to be. I'm talking weight room now.
Okay. Yeah. Specific weight room.
Yep.
Yeah. And I've actually broken my off ice. I do a lot of off ice outside of the weight room, just specifically with the patterns. And
yes,
there's resistance involved, especially when we work on turn mechanics and the biomechanics of turning. We have resistance bands that add the resistance so we can maintain the positions and push through those. But you had a very articulate way of, basically mentioning how to build out the model. Once you understand the positions and the landmarks and the biomechanics and whatnot, yes, you can work them off ice. You can integrate them into your warm-ups. You can integrate them into like warm-ups, like pre-practice, post-practice, pre-gym time. But I do think, and it's great that you realize that one of the most important applications of these positions is when you get in the weight room. So again, when you can cue the athletes to be pushing through, this is where we need you to apply force. This is, when you really watch them and make sure they're maintaining those positions to get strong in the right places. It pains me when I go to gyms where I see athletes where, their feet are 5 feet apart and their center of mass is dead in the center and most of it's being picked up by the hamstring or whatnot. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really, I know every exercise isn't for transference, but we're in a very specialized environment with skating and movement patterns and whatnot. So if you're going to load those positions in the gym, you need to load those positions properly.
Absolutely.
Service to the athlete. So, and again, that's usually as we go through, it's simple. I get back to the simple things done savagely well. You just go kind of through we do usually some sort of explosive lift to start. And then we get into a big bilateral for big motor unit recruitment and whatnot. And then following that, when we get into the unilateral stuff, that's when we really focus on making sure that those patterns and those positions are where they need to be.
Excellent. Talk to us about those imitation exercises. I remember, oh gosh, Joel, probably 2 years ago, I posted something on Instagram and you commented, you're like, Anth, I'm glad you're doing this. I've been doing this for years when I was speed skating. And I believe that I had used an instrument called the flex disc where it's got like wheels on a, you remember what it was? And then I used some stuff. Who was the individual that was a really highly decorated USA speed skater? Again, Derek Hansen had posted this, and it was these imitation exercises that we added to our dynamic warm-up. Who was up?
Might have been Joey. Was it Joey Mantra?
No, I would know the name.
Joey's one of the newer guys.
He was, I think he might have won a silver. Shawnee.
Johnny Davis.
That's it.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, Shawnee. It's funny. He trained in Calgary.
There you
when
go.
I was there for the 2 years. Yeah.
Derek Hansen, I had mentioned something on social media, and Derek Hansen said, you need to check out Shawnee Davis's work. So I think I YouTubed some of these exercises. I'm like, oh my gosh, these are great exercises that we can add pattern-specific work, long durations. You would call it isometric. Talk to me about what those off-ice imitation exercises are. And I'm cheating here because on your presentation, I'm going to hook this up to the show notes. You talked about the ABC of off-ice imitation exercises by a famous speed skater. Do you remember that?
That's the European.
Yes, and I watched it in preparation for our interview. Yeah, exactly. And I watched it in preparation for our interview. But I'm curious as to your flair. Maybe you just answered that question. You work them after your explosive, your bilateral, then you move to that, or do you do them as part of your warm up? And if so, and I know it's difficult to do because some people will be watching this on YouTube, some people will just be listening to this, but what are a few of your exercises that you like to work with your hockey players?
The main ones, again, we start with very basic and then we move to more dynamic, I guess is the best way to put it. Something as simple as a single leg hold, where you're standing on one leg, you get into the skating position where you're driving the weight over the ball of your foot, and then you're just trying to get 90-degree knee, 90-degree hip angles and hold that position for 30 seconds.
That'll humble you.
And if you've never done it before, it doesn't matter the level of athletes, they all get wobbly. Huh. So just stabilizing and strengthening that very basic fundamental position. So out of that position, we move into more like you can work in some eccentric and some impulses to just learn how to attenuate those forces within that position. So you had a really good person on your show who was explaining, I feel bad that I can't remember his name, a lot of the metabolic and breathing, but he got into blood flow restriction and how long duration isometrics.
Ryan Kozak.
It was a fantastic, I was just mind blown. The guy's a genius, but he explained as he talked to this and all the mitochondrial benefits and whatnot, basically just spending a lot of time in these low position isometrics will give you the same results as, a blood flow restriction. So, not only do you get massive amounts of strength and stability in the skating positions, you also start getting some of these metabolic benefits as well, which is pretty neat. You're filling a lot of buckets with very simple exercise.
And not to interject, but this is where we talked at the start of the interview. This was early in my research for my candidacy when I was looking at the speed skating literature. I said, how do you create speed on the ice? You have to overcome air friction and overcome the ice friction. The ice friction looks like my hairline. Air friction, I can only speak on lower the better. How about that for a speed skater? Lower the better, right? Everyone spends thousands of dollars on whether it's clap skates or different kinds of technologies. I don't think those are even legal anymore for speed skating, but the air resistant suits, this and this. But the lower you can get in your hockey stride while keeping those we talked about, the bandwidth of what we talked about before, the better, right? And those exercises, those imitation exercises serve to do just that.
And you will, if you spend, and if you commit to them and if you spend time, we call it getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, because there's nothing comfortable about doing an isometric for that long. It's just, it sucks. but the results are so great. So, never fails. I go through my first block. We don't get on the ice very much. We might do like very basic, like kind of gliding and patterning work. But if you spend time in these positions and you can really strengthen and stabilize and just basic patterns like single leg squats, as I said, pulsing, learning how to transfer weight side to side, like weight transfers. If you get very strong at that, it's usually within about 6 weeks that we start getting on the ice and really ramping things up. And the parents will come out and their first comments like, I can't believe how low they are. So you will gain depth just by, this is going to sound bad, forcing those positions for long periods of time.
So there's some follow-up questions. So let's
Sure.
talk about these off ice imitation exercises, for lack of a better word.
Yep.
What is a progressive way that you work with your athletes? What does the time start with? You talked about single leg, then you talked about more dynamic exercises, staying in that low position. Is it always 30 seconds a leg, or do you start 10 seconds and work your way to 30? And then last but not least, so two questions: time, progression, and then frequency. Do you do that every day of the week? Do you do it once a week? Do you do it twice a week? Assuming it's off season and assuming that kids are going to see it at least 3 times a week.
Oh, it's very good questions. I'll start with time and duration. And again, it depends on the maturity and the strength of the athlete. Most of the time, we break them into positions, patterns, and then power. So
Yep.
that's an increase in dynamicness. It's not a word, but I just made it up. Your positions, obviously, you can hold a position a lot longer than you can do a very dynamic, powerful exercise. So with positions, we'll start anywhere between 20 and 30 seconds worth of holding, and we usually do a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio on those. So 30 on, 30 off, or 20 on, 20 off. If the kids are quite underdeveloped or whatnot, we might even do a 20-second on, 40-second off. Like you kind of ebb and flow with the work rest ratio. That we increase, like that's where you just use the progressive overload. So each week, depending on the groups and their strength and their capacities at the time, that's where we'll add 5 to 10 seconds per week within the positions. Patterns, we usually start same thing. Patterns are generally a 20-second, 20 on, 40 off. And again, we extend that out through time with power. So as we get into more like the skater jumps, different varieties of skating jumping, basically, those will start anywhere from, we'll give a number to it. So I want to see, 3 per leg, but a lot of times as we progress through, call it 15 seconds, and we'll move up to, we get guys in the 45-second to 1 minute range.
Wow.
Went through explosive imitation.
And forgive my ignorance. I just want to make sure I understand this so the listener understands. Position, pattern, power. Am I right to assume this? Position, something like a deep single leg hold. Would that be a position? Okay. Pattern, maybe that same deep single leg hold, but you've got almost a stride component where you've got the left leg out, but you're balancing on the right leg. You're extending as you would push off on the ice with the leg off in the air, balancing for that one leg. That would be pattern. Am I accurate?
Yes.
And then power, you'd take that same one, you'd stay low on your hockey stride, you'd balance on that left leg, you'd stride over, staying low, hop, and land on the other leg while staying low. Does that make sense? Are we on the same page?
Yes, you're landing exactly. Always trying to land in that position.
Yep.
Where you can take, that's where I know you did a section on reflective eccentrics, but you get a lot of that stimulus through your power ones.
Yep.
And it's exactly like you said, the patterns are just, you basically summarize what a weight shift and hold is. So you hold you hold your weight on one leg, the other's extended, and then pushing down and moving your center of mass over to the other leg. As simple as that sounds. And then you fully unweight the first leg. So it's, as you said, it's a progression of how dynamic those exercises get.
Yep.
But it's also a progression, and you can't jump straight into power unless you've established the positions and the patterns.
Would those be appropriate if I hyperlink this for the listeners, that ABC of skating imitation exercises? Would those cover some of the ideas that we talked about in that video?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll actually, I'll send you a link. There's a newer skater. He just retired a couple of years ago, a 1,500-meter skater from the US, Joel Becker, who has some really good YouTube video series on some of these progressions. And he's put them into workout.
Outstanding. If you could send that, selfishly, I want to watch them. And then selfishly, obviously for the listener too, I'd love to, I like these. I just have a vision in the model that we have of putting those on our gain or grow day for our jump training. And I love it because you're deep in that hockey position. And if you want to call it stretch sorting cycle, but you're staying low while you're producing that as opposed to a traditional pogo jump or something where you're getting stiffness of the ankle and foot. You're getting this not from the bottom of the kinetic chain, the foot, but it's more at the hip, if that makes any sense, right? So it's a deeper, you're starting at a deeper angle. And I really like that. I also, and I'm going to steal it, the way we structure our imitation exercises, we use that, what I call, I think I talked to you about it before, that flex disc, which is essentially like a disc with wheels in the bottom. It emulates almost, right? Like the wheels emulate a low coefficient of friction. We're able to stay in those patterns, stay low, 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 and stride out with the assistance of the wheel. Now, in this case, there's no wheel assistance. You're staying low and you're holding. And I like that even more, right? At any rate, just the hamster wheel is spinning here, and I like it.
And it's more painful that way.
Oh my goodness!
For lack of a better, it's or more uncomfortable. I should use the term more uncomfortable. But like you said, I mean, it really focuses now. Now we're building a ton of tension through those big mover muscles in the hip that are imperative to skating. You also made a good comment, and I should circle back to when you in your question about how these are progressed in. Depending on what the day is, I just go traditionally. Here's my acceleration day. Here's my speed day. Here's we do more of a skating strength day. We'll load the positions. Like I got weight vests, so on our skating strength day, like more of a hypertrophy, we load the positions. So the guys are doing them in weight vest. So like I said, uncomfortable. We'll save more the dynamic explosive ones for our more dynamic and explosive days, be that an acceleration day or a speed day. Just so we're working within the same capacities that we're trying to build for that.
And do you have videos of those as well? Selfishly, I'd like to, if you have anything like that, please you can send that. I just want to, and if it's okay, of course, if not, I'd love to share those with our listeners, and I'd love to get some ideas as well. Last little pivot here before we go.
Sure.
Speed application. I asked you earlier in our conversation, I said, write it on a napkin. What are the elements? And I stole this a while back, and I like this idea of speed and its application. This was from Joe DeFranco a long time ago. He had a presentation on the prowler and how he used it to improve first step speed. And he said, it's so easy, I could write it on a napkin. Someone challenged him, and I liked it. He said, number one, mobility, right? Getting in those positions. Number two, relative strength. And number three, the skill of actually doing it. You have to have all of those. One thing that I've really struggled with, I'll be honest with you, is the mobility, and specifically ankle mobility. And
I was going to say ankle.
And I honestly, like, yes, we still do it. Yes, I still feel, and I'm questioning myself every day on this. But the moment you put that skate boot on, I don't know if it damn well helps or not. I really mean that, right? Like I had the opportunity of doing a capstone project for a during my PhD for a skating company, and the massive amounts of money in the technology industry for both skates and sticks at all levels. And what they would like to do in a perfect world is have the stiffest skate possible in the frontal plane, so side to side, and then have the most malleable in the front, right? So you can get deeper in your stride, but that doesn't always work that way. And I question myself, maybe I heard Adam Virgil say it a long time ago, but I don't know who it was, where I'm like, man, am I wasting time on this ankle mobility stuff? Because the moment they get their skate boot on, I don't know if it's going to help me or not. How would you answer that? Not an easy question. From your experience, do you do the ankle mobility work? Have you seen results? Have you done any research? Have you seen any research?
Have I done research? No. My research is more through, I look at sprinting a lot for, because that's your ultimate expression of speed.
Yep.
And as much as it hasn't become widely adopted in the hockey world, the exposure to those levels of, those impulses, the levels of force, like you said, from elasticity standpoint, sprinters have terrible ankle mobility. That's the other thing too. They're extremely stiff. Like they do not have great ankle mobility, but they have amazing stiffness. So that's kind of how I look at it. A lot of my, again, by explaining to the athletes how to put force down into the ground, and get them in that position, we're creating a lot of stiffness and torsion and tension through the ankle complex. I think a Dietz is, it's more of I hate using the term functional, but it's more of an applied version of the Cal Dietz spring ankle.
Yeah.
So, because getting into these imitation positions and really driving through the ball of your foot, you're going to put that torsion through your ankle as it, so to speak. So I don't do outside of the imitations. They get so much exposure to those, they get so much stimulus. I don't give them more exposure.
You're killing two birds with one stone because you're asking them to hold that position anyway, correct?
Yes, exactly. Excellent. So, and mobility is kind of a funny thing. Mobility is just the ability to produce that range of motion, be able to effectively and efficiently go through that desired range of motion. So yes, we need the athletes to have a certain range of mobility, but there's also a hypermobility component. When I talked about the 3 positions, I don't want to see them getting hyperextended very often. Do we work on it as a, protective? Somewhat, but we don't, our goal is not to make, have everyone doing the splits by the end of the summer, I guess is the best way to put it. So they're going to have great mobility through the ranges of motion that they need to have mobility through. And they're going to have a ton of strength and stability through those ranges of motion. And within that, hopefully it gives them the capacity, if they do see themselves in the occasional, not to, get away from repetitive motion, but if they occasionally put themselves in a out of position into an extended range of motion, they have the structural capacity just from being so strong in the correct one to be able to absorb those from time to time. If that makes sense.
Final pivot, my friend. Where can the listeners learn more about you?
I have a website, so it's GameChangers.training.
Okay.
That we're working on. I'm not overly social on social media, but my wife is insisting that I be more so. If anybody can reach out on social media, I'm very good at getting back to people. I'm not a big poster type person. And yeah, just my email's on the website, and reach out through social media. That's probably the 2 best ways to get a hold of me if you need.
Our guest today has been Joel Becker. Joel, thanks so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it, Anthony.